Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio and welcome to the Capricorn TV live stream. We are going to be speaking to today's author, researcher and scientist, Mr. Brooks Agnew. Let me tell you a little bit about Brooks before I bring him on. Brooks is the author of The Arc of Millions of Years, and we have had Brooks on before for several shows, mostly on the hollow earth, solar physics. I guess we're going to get into all sorts today. But Brooks is a commercial scientist, and he works in the alternative energy industry on cars, I believe. And we haven't touched on that today, so I'm going to get the author to touch a bit of that. I want to bring him on. First of all, I want to introduce my co-host, Susan. Are you with me on the line, Susan?
I am. Aloha from Kauai.
Wow, great to see you there, Susan, on video today. We got a big guest today, Mr. Brooks Agnew. Are you excited?
I'm excited,
very excited.
Sure.
Wow. Oh, that's great. Listen, let's bring on Brooks. Brooks, welcome to the show. First of all, we are on the Skype TV today.
Thanks so much. It's good to be here. Usually we do audio. You decided to do video today. It's much more exciting. Although, as I have said, I have a face for radio. We'll get by today.
For sure. It's great to see you, Brooks. It's great to see you in the flesh, as they say. Brooks, I don't know. I mean, I've skipped past what you do on the day-to-day job. Let's talk about the car industry. Are you having success? I know you've been grueling through this automotive industry with the electric vehicles. How are we getting on with that? Have we got progress?
We have a lot of progress on the technology side. We are now in our 10th iteration of automobile. We now have a pickup truck that's a little bit larger than a Ford Ranger. It has a 1,000-pound payload. It'll go 100 miles on a charge for about a penny and a half a mile. Very economical, very sleek. You can check it out at the website at ev-fleet.com. The regulation side of the business the last 5 years has been really challenging. The agencies, namely the EPA and the Department of Transportation, have really pulled out all the stops and built a huge army against independent car companies bringing vehicles to the American highway. So that's been a real challenge. And I've been in the industry for over 30 years now, built Nissans and Toyotas and GMs. And now I'm building my own brand. And it's, believe me, the agencies are set up to protect the global corporations. And it's very tough to get through, but we are making progress.
Tell me a little bit about Elon Musk, because I watched one of these success stories with Elon Musk. I know he's doing a similar thing. What's different what Elon Musk is doing? Because I know he's a bit of a renegade. Is he competition, Brooks?
No, he's not really competition. He's in a different market than we are. We like to think of him as a colleague, although the real founders of Tesla were our actual colleagues. Great inventors, great hard work, and all 26 founders of Tesla. When Elon came on and did a hostile takeover and got rid of all them, we had a little bit of a sour feeling about it for a while. But I have to hand it to Elon. He has weathered a full-on assault by the Treasury Department, by the Department of Energy, by the IRS, by the EPA, and he has managed to survive all of that. I will say he is very, very talented at selling stock, and I wish him all the luck at selling cars as well.
Wow. Brooks, tell me what a Six Sigma Master is. I read this in the biography. I'm like, a Six Sigma Master black belt. And I'm like, is this kind of martial artist?
Yeah, that's really what it boils down to. No, in manufacturing, the Japanese really handed our hats to us in the early 80s. At that time, we made cars that didn't even have 6-digit odometers. We thought when they get to 100,000 miles, you just throw them away and buy another car. Detroit, excuse me, although technologically the most powerful city in the world at the time, had an attitude, and that was This is what we build. You will buy it, and you will like it. And the Japanese picked up on a couple of my mentors, Duran, and also one of the Bible writers in this industry, began to teach the Japanese quality principles. In other words, don't just keep making garbage and rely on warranties to pick up the loose ends. Mm-hmm. Make a quality product, make what the customer wants, and do it right the first time. And over, I guess the last 15 years, we've really refined those mathematical tools. We call them statistics. It's kind of dry when you think about it, but it is a way of looking at variation in all kinds of processes. Measurement, processing your metal, processing your labor, and being able to measure that, feed it back into the system to eliminate the variation and the mistakes. Mm. And once you master, there's about 100 of these tools. Once you master 100 of these tools, you're considered a Six Sigma black belt. Once you can teach other black belts how to do this, you're a master black belt. Wow. It takes not just time and service, but you have to have a dollar amount of profit recovery. And about 4 years ago, I crossed the $500 million mark in profit recovery. So I don't even count it anymore. I'm probably one of 6 or 7 in the country with this level of accomplishment. So I've done all kinds of contracts for Ford, for Chrysler, for Honda, for Toyota. I've done Nissan several times. I helped launch the Nissan Altima. It really opens up the manufacturing world to you.
Wow. I'm going to throw a question to Susan in a moment. Just want one more thing to wrap up. Where are we at with the battery technology? Because the battery technology has always been the problem. The lithium, first of all, getting the lithium deposits and for lithium-based batteries, and then getting these supercapacitor batteries designed with new technologies, and it's been really difficult. It's a difficult thing to do this. Where are we at with the battery technology?
Well, that's a really great question, and this is a classic example of what happens when government gets involved with an industry and they don't know what they're doing. As I said, the Japanese kind of handed our hats to us in the 80s. It's because they listened to the customer. But when the government got involved in the early 90s and said, we're going to pour a bunch of money into battery technology, the one person they forgot was us. They didn't pay any attention to what we needed as a battery in the vehicle. So consequently, about 10 very large battery companies got started and 10 very large battery companies went bankrupt because they couldn't sell their batteries. To this day, I have a warehouse full. I own all the 300 amp hour batteries on Earth, and none of them meet our requirements. We have to use them because it's all that's available. Now we're talking to Taiwan, we're talking to Phoenix, we're talking to China to make a battery that does what we want it to do. We still do not have one. So we have to live with what we have. We buy very complex, very elaborate battery management systems to make up the difference, but it's still not getting the job done.
I wanted to take a little bit of time to do that today because I hadn't focused on that before, and I want to give people the background to who you are in the day job. I know you're an accomplished author as well. We're going to get to some really awesome subjects. I mean, I don't know, spirituality, consciousness, Planet X, solar system physics, the whole lot. We'll have a round table today of ideas. I'll throw the first question to you, Susan, if you'd like to jump in.
Sure. I think maybe like a bridge question is, from your standpoint that you see Brooks with, you're involved in so many different things. I would say you're one of the probably most holistic people that I've come into contact with in terms of your knowledge and insight, but the fact that you're actually physically doing things as well and bringing things to the world. So just thank you for that, number one. But number two, because you've got such a beautiful, like wide-eyed view, what do you see needs to happen scientifically, but also from a deliverability standpoint in the next couple of years? Like, it's a big question. Like, where do you think our planet is at in terms of like what we need? And what do you see that we need to be doing differently from a science standpoint in order to, be in flow with some of these big changes that are happening?
Well, it's a pretty far-reaching question, and it even stems into politics.
Right.
When it comes to the planet, There are things that make sense and things that don't make sense. I was in a meeting in Frankfort, Kentucky, talking to a potential plant site, and they were ready to deny us access to a plant in Kentucky. And I said, what surprises me is here we are in the 21st century, and we're still shoveling our planet into our tanks and burning it. Mm-hmm. And in some respects, gasoline is a really good fuel. It's a cheap fuel. For instance, to take you and 3 of your friends a mile would cost about 27, maybe 30 cents with the average full-size car. If you were to go to China, to say Shanghai, and talk to a rickshaw driver and say, I want you to take me and 3 of my friends a mile for 30 cents, he would probably beat you over the head. In that respect, gasoline's a really cheap fuel. It's a smart fuel when you're driving 300, 400, 500 miles. But when you're driving in the city, your trip's going to be 5 miles, 10 miles, 25 miles. Gasoline is a rotten fuel. It fills our cities with pollution. It ruins your car. It's very expensive. It was recently said that the average American idles away about $500 a year, just idling at stoplights and stop signs and in traffic. This is where the electric vehicle shines. So when we designed a vehicle, we didn't design it with the plan of having polar bears come down and hug our customers. We designed it with the idea that there's a smarter way to do the other 90% of driving, and that is, let's use electricity. Electricity for electric vehicles doesn't add a single pound of CO2 to the atmosphere. It's all powered with surplus electricity. Most electric vehicles are charged up overnight. I'd say about 44% of our electricity is made by coal. About 35% of our electricity is made by nuclear. The rest through hydroelectric and other forms of power. Well, those plants don't just fire up during the daytime, run at full blast, and then shut down at 10 o'clock at night. They idle all night long, and they make electricity nobody buys. So electric vehicles using that electricity, it's basically CO2 neutral. So about every 6 months, the oil companies put out a, quote, new study that says electric vehicles pollute more than gasoline-powered vehicles. The real trouble is, and this is the gap you're talking about, we have an education gap in our public. We believe the propaganda that the oil companies put out there. What's worse is the corporations that run the EPA, like the oil companies, that run the Department of Transportation, like General Motors, are there to prevent new technologies from hitting the American highway. That's why we're so far behind Europe. We're so far behind, quote, developing nations, because they saw the need. They see the prospect of putting emission-free vehicles into their society. A lot of people think, well, Nigeria's got plenty of oil, and they do, but they don't have a lot of gasoline. They don't refine their own fuel. We refine it and send it back to them. Look at all the Caribbean islands, the Dominican Republic, all of that. No refining capabilities. You know, today gasoline down there costs $7.50 a gallon, if you can get it. That's why these electric vehicles make a lot of sense. That's why moving the planet in a different direction, using wind, using wave technology in the ocean, using solar technology makes a tremendous amount of sense. Now, why is it that when a utility says, oh, we're going to put a solar farm in, and by the way, we're going to raise your electric rates 2 cents on the kilowatt hour. Wait a minute, I thought the solar was free. Well, it is, but you see, solar power isn't three-phase. Yeah. Now that we've connected our entire grid together in one big grid, all the phases from California to New York to Texas to Canada have to be matched. That's what the National Electrical Reliability Corporation does. They match the phases of all this power around the country, which means every bit of solar power that's generated at your house, every wind generator that's out there in the desert, goes on 1 or 2 legs, and it has to be balanced over the overall grid. That's why they charge the extra money. And when I went to Amsterdam 2 years ago, I made a presentation. We're doing this all wrong. Don't take all this extra energy and put it back on your grid. make another grid, make a local grid, a grid for your building, a grid for your city, a grid for your town, a different meter, so to speak, and just run your local stuff off local energy, and then run your grid stuff off the grid, and that solves the problem.
Brooks, we got a lot of earthquakes going off. I want to get into some planetary stuff at the moment. What is the story about all the rise of earthquakes at the moment? Are we in the danger zone?
We are. Since 1985, earthquakes have been increasing, and the strength of the earthquakes have been increasing. And there are all kinds of people trying to make, reasons, root causes. Why is this happening? Could it be the sun? There is some relationship with the sun. But why is the sun behaving differently? It boils down to evidence that we see another gravitational influence in our solar system beside the 9 planets in the sun that we have. We don't know where it is. It may be not visible because it may not be reflecting light, but we are seeing the effects of it on our sun, on the other planets in our solar system, and on ours. And we have a very, tenuous planet. We live on tectonic plates floating around in a bowl of milk like cornflakes. We're ramming into each other. So anything that stretches or squeezes our planet has profound effects where these interfaces between the continental shelves are. And that's what we're seeing.
Can we attribute this to, I've done a couple of shows on Planet X, and there's like a mass hysteria out there at the moment, Brooks. Do you look into Planet X? Do you accept Planet X? Do you see this as the main contender?
I'm kind of a null hypothesis scientist. That is to say, I want to prove that Planet X doesn't exist. And so I start gathering all the evidence that I can now definitively rule out a Planet X. If you can't rule it out, then it must exist. And if it exists, how can it exist, without us being able to detect it? Well, all of our telescopes, land-based or space-based, are really good at seeing bodies that give off light. Stars, that's how Kepler works. Kepler works by looking at stars, not planets. It looks at the diminution of the star's light when the planet crosses in front of it. It sort of eclipses the star. We measure that amount of light and we say, oh, that planet's this diameter, it has this period around the sun, therefore it has this mass. It's a pretty complex math formula, but it works. But what if the plane is tilted like this and the planet never eclipses the star? Then we can't see it. And one thing we know from Hubble is that most of the planets in our galaxy are what we call rogue planets. They don't revolve around any sun. They're free floating through the galaxy. So if a planet's not giving off light and it's traveling at, say, 50, 80, 90,000 miles an hour, it doesn't take long to sneak up on Earth before our sun begins to illuminate that planet and we see it. By the time we see it, it's too late to pack the bags.
Do you want to jump in for a second, Susan?
What was that?
James just asked if I wanted to jump in here for a second. I heard in another interview, I think that you were saying about that there was at one point maybe another planet that was in our solar system or close to it, and it looked like there was that it had smashed and broken up into pieces. Did I hear that accurately? That what we're in right now, based on the Fibonacci sequence, we should be in a greater alignment than what we are in right now. Is there something else that's out there that you believe may be affecting what's happening and going on Earth right now, based on what you had said previously?
Well, these are really two questions. Immanuel Velikovsky wrote a book called Worlds in Collision, for which his contemporaries excoriated him. Later, the evidence seemed to bear out what he was claiming, and that is that a rogue planet, and maybe its moons, came through our solar system, smashed into another planet, which is now our asteroid belt, and very geotechnically affected Mars and Earth before it passed out of our solar system. Now, some have taken the writings of Zecharia Sitchin and said, oh, this is a periodic thing. It happens every 3,200 years, or it happens, as Gil Broussard says, every 360 years. But as I said, as a null hypothesis, there's no evidence to disprove it, but there's no evidence to say that it actually occurs. I think that the jury's still out. There is supposedly a period between September of this year and March of next year that is supposed to be the mathematical do or die appearance for this planet X, which is supposedly 7 times the size of Earth. I will just say the jury's out until then. Until then, I'm making plans to build a company and something that actually involves a future beside making a bunker.
I think a lot of people... Sorry, Susie, do you want to respond?
I do, because, when we were interviewing John Anthony West, there was something that came up, and, Brooks, I think that you're probably one of the best people to ask on this. Do you think that there's times that the planet actually shifts in its density, that like as a whole? I mean, because obviously I know from a consciousness standpoint, vibrationally, how we're feeling and thinking and what our consciousness is relates to what we're seeing, and kind of like, maybe even some different timelines that we're in. But, overall from globally as a planet, do you think that in our past, based on some of these solar system type of events, these bigger occurrences, that it actually changes the density of the planet during these cycles? I just wonder what your thoughts were on that.
Well, density is a proportion. It's grams per cubic centimeter. I think that that's quite possible, that the planet could change density. I think over maybe several millions of years, the Earth has been expanding. And I think that expansion is because it's becoming asymptotic. That is to say, the rate of expansion is slowing down, which means that the density change is slowing down as well. However, you bring up an interesting point that John Anthony West brought up, and that is that there is a symbiotic relationship between the consciousness of man and the physical presence of the Earth. Now, I'm not much of a metaphysicist, but I can tell you that the energy that's put out by the consciousness of man, and I'm just going to call it the average energy of the human race on planet Earth, it does have an effect on the planet itself. The planet reacts to these things. Now, some people could say, well, that's the judgment of God. When the more part of the planet gets wicked, then the planet's going to have some allergic reaction and have a volcano erupt or a hurricane come in and cleanse the area. All well and good. I'm not arguing against that. But I am saying that there is a direct relationship between 7 billion intentions and the physical state of the matter on the Earth. The Earth is actually made of lots of space, very little third-dimensional matter. And it is all affected by the total energy of the environment. There's more people alive on Earth now than I believe at any time ever in its existence. We have abilities to transfer information, energy, food around the planet like never before. Are we using it correctly? I don't think so. I think we're still a whole bunch of tribes with a whole bunch of tribal flags, and we're still fighting over food and land. And I think it's time we graduated from that.
Thanks.
How do we harness the goodwill of the people? I mean, I inherently think there's people out there that have a good nature about them. I don't think people are born to be nasty and evil or, to ruin the planet. I think we're conditioned. I think we're all bright kids and we all have bright futures. And I think we get slowly worn into the ground from a very early age and indoctrinated to these societal political structures. How do we harness that and broadcast that as a message for hope in humanity?
Well, I think what you're asking is, how do we shift that average? If the average is fearful and angry and resentful and selfish, how do we shift it more toward something that's not selfish, not fearful, more of a benefactor to all life on Earth than being, I want mine, but everybody else has to lose. And I think it's programs like this. I think it's our ability to get a message out there that there is hope. And the greater message is that what you're thinking, what you're doing with your thoughts affects the average consciousness of the planet. If we were to shift it more positive, if we were to shift it to, hey, we're all on this planet together, we're no longer Americans and Germans and Iranians, we're Earthlings that happen to speak different languages, and we have a common purpose, and that is to live within the energy set of our environment, keep it clean, and be good stewards of this planet. Then I think everything changes.
Haven't they done some experiments with that, where they can test the consciousness of group consciousness, where they get people to will something and they can scientifically show that there's a needle spike somewhere?
It's been proven 100 times. I've heard of other radio programs where they've had intention experiments. I've seen other authors who are also public speakers do intention experiments. It has a massive effect. Even the scriptures talk about where people are in agreement to do things, and unfortunately it's for good or for ill. Those things are manifested. Those things happen.
It kind of goes back to quantum physics then, with the observation, that if you observe something, you're changing the outcome of an experiment or the outcome of the observation. It kind of goes back to that on a quantum scale.
As a physicist, I can't tell you how many times we've run into the observation effect limiting our ability to do experiments. The effect that we have on the sample changes the outcome. And that's why I wrote the book, Remembering the Future, because I said, well, if we can affect the present, then we can probably affect the past, and we can affect the future. And that is exactly the case.
You want to jump in, Susan?
Sure. I heard you mention before, this goes into, consciousness, fear, also related to what I call our really amazing, beautiful potential as creators, as beings that are here on let's say a multi-dimensional realm that we definitely have the capacity to create on all different realms. I heard you talk before about that even HAARP can't see past like 8 to 10 miles into the earth. That if you were to do a CAT scan, that's pretty much the furthest that they can go. And that you had also said that, if I heard correctly, that there's anomalies between 8 to 900 miles, deep into the earth, where, and again, you can speak about it much more eloquently than I can. That there's much more magic, let's put it that way, that's happening and going on. So sometimes I think when people talk about the powers that be, and that we're all so controlled, and geez, what can we really do about that? I think about these numbers, and I think about what you said, and I say, well, if those that are doing things that are not so nice for humanity or not so nice for the planet, they don't have the entire planet figured out, maybe not even close. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, with
Sure.
the different miles and maybe what that sparks for you, because that was one of the things that sparked for me.
There are two different measurement systems. All the HAARPs on the planet are built near mineral-rich areas, and one of the functions of HAARP is to be able to beam long-wave radiation into the ground, look for the reflections of it, and be able to locate things like oil and gas and coal and metals and things like that. It can only see so far. The technology that I developed in 1983, you could see about 3,000 feet. It wasn't very powerful, only about 50 watts. But the stuff that they're using now is so powerful in the billion watt in the billion watt range. They could see quite a bit further, but the information gets very scattered. The other measurement system is where they use earthquakes. They have geophones, very advanced high-frequency geophones set up around the planet. And when there's an earthquake, say, in the South Pacific, it thumps the planet, the vibrations go through the planet, and they're picked up by other geophones on the other side of the planet. They create two general kinds of waves, pressure waves and shear waves. And being able to time those waves and put them together, it creates a seismogram, sort of like a CAT scan of the Earth. And what they have traditionally done is squeeze that information into their current view of the Earth, that it's just a big molten ball, and we live on a cooler mantle on the outside on tectonic plates. The information doesn't match up, and they can't really tell a lot from it. But when you reverse that and measure from the listening point back to the source instead of the other way around, you get a nice clear image of what appears to be at least a hollow Earth or Earth with delineations of phase. We have a central core area, which appears to be about 1,200 miles in diameter. Inside of that has now been confirmed there is a single iron crystal that exists at about 6,000 degrees, which is the same temperature as the sun. It's not a fusion star. It's just an iron crystal, probably putting off something like a white light, very a shorter wave infrared. On the outside of that is open air, and then an inner crust, and then about an 800 to 900 mile thick crust, the outside of which we live on, the inside of which looks very much like the outside, oceans and probably foliage and mountains and everything else. We've measured the oceans. We're getting better at being able to see the major mountain ranges, but we're not ready to make full reports on that because it's so different than what our planetary core geology is telling us from, let's just call it the religiosity of science. The high priests of science are saying, no, it couldn't be that way, even though all the evidence is pointing that way. So what we have is old ideas, old dogma running into information that's modern. And when you look at it from, say, let's just call it our standpoint, we see a planet that has a core that's very dense, say somewhere around 15 grams, 15 or 18 grams per cubic centimeter, rotating very fast, and a crust that's rotating somewhat slower than that. And it creates this massive magnetosphere, which protects our planet from all kinds of cosmic radiation. Not all the planets in our solar system have a magnetosphere, which means one of two things. Either the core is rotating at exactly the same speed as the crust, or they don't have a core. But I would say, without a doubt, most planets form as hollow spheres.
Wow. Having that gap of air, as you say, that's got to be detrimental in terms of it's going to be allowing movement. It's going to allow a shifting of that crust if it has an outside activation, if there's an outside force that might tip that.
It's true. It's affected by tidal gravity, which basically stretches and squeezes that crust all the time. The moon does it, other planets do it, the sun does it, and that's what basically causes the crust to be so hot all the time, and it's full of molten materials. These CAT scans that we do can see down about 250 miles. HARP can see down maybe 40 or 50 miles, and that's about it. We've never drilled any deeper than 8 miles, so it really doesn't matter what HARP sees beyond that. We couldn't drill to it anyway.
Go back to the time of Charles Hapgood with his Earth crust displacement theory. I mean, it's not crazy to think this anymore.
No, and the Coriolis effect, which is basically any spinning body has a force that pushes at a right angle to the rotating body of coordinates. So you have two bodies that are rotating at different speeds, and so they begin to form sort of an oscillation between themselves. And if they get to a certain harmonic, it could just roll the whole crust over. That's what the sun does every 11 years, only the inside is what rotates, not the outside.
How far of a shift could we get? I mean,
if it begins, it'll go 180 degrees. It has to line up by the axes. You can't have one axis going perpendicular to the other. They will eventually line up again.
Being an oblong shape, not purely spherical, would that not be a braking mechanism to stop that? Would that be why it would stop at the 180 degree?
Not likely. The core has a lot more magnetism than the crust does, and the crust has all kinds of anomalies and voids and sort of amoebic fields in it, but the core is very, very well incorporated.
Wow, it's mind blowing. Do you think this the woolly mammoths found in Siberia with the fresh vegetation? Do you think that's what happened to them? That these guys were eating the fresh vegetation and there was an earthquake?
It could be. I mean, I've lived in areas that reach temperatures of 70 below zero. I can tell you that if a cow gets out there and it'll be frozen in its tracks. If a Siberian mammoth wandered out there and got hit in the face with an 80 below wind, it's going to turn its backside to it and try to walk away from it. Eventually, it's going to be frozen in its tracks. And when its lungs freeze, that body's going to freeze in a matter of hours.
Let's bring us back to a historical concept, Brooks. I mean, you look back at history, I mean, it's hard to deny a cataclysm hit this planet in the past. It's hard to deny. Historians will, academics will. I mean, there is a denial going on, but it's very hard to deny this when all the mythologies of the world are talking about a time when there was floods and something happened to flood, something caused the flood. I mean, it was a planetary effect, no doubt. Do you have a hypothesis what you might think that might be?
Well, there's one of two things that could have happened there. One thing we know for sure, we see the results of the pattern of the surface of our planet. It's clear that all those tectonic plates, all those continental shelves, once fit together all the way around like this. Mm-hmm. And Neil Adams did a great film of how that's done. Now, we know water can't compress, so that means that the entire planet, except for maybe the tallest mountains, were underwater. Mm-hmm. But if that was the case, we would see sedimentary layers of seashells and sea life high up in the mountains, and that's what we see. If that was the case, then we would see a significant disparity between the age of the sea floor and the age of the mountains, and that's what we see, about 2.5 billion years different in age. So it's clear that our planet went through horrendous cataclysms. We just happen to be in the Goldilocks period when we have liquid water on the surface, and we happen to be, have some atmosphere remaining, about 5 miles of it, maybe 6. Actually, I've been up to about, 23,500 feet, and you can still breathe. It's not hard. It's not easy, but you can still breathe. So that's about 4.5 miles.
You want to jump in there, Susan?
Mine more or less has to do just transitioning back to, I guess, consciousness and the physics of consciousness. I've heard you bring up some fascinating research about the placebo effect, performing operations that were not really operations, and then the people were cured or they felt healed afterwards. Can you talk a little bit more about, because obviously you've got a background in physics as well, and knowing what you know on so many different levels, because I know that there are people that, even though that they believe in the power of healing, and there's some people that, obviously even listen to this show that are well versed in consciousness, or, that the mind is a very powerful tool. I know that there are people that are, suffering out there, whether they have cancer or, some other pretty dramatic things that are happening and going on for them. And they're really looking, to understand how this works. There's a belief that it does, and, some are really tapping into that, but maybe you can just talk a little bit more about the physics aspect of how this is possible. It actually might help to, give people a bit more of an anchor that they didn't have previously.
Well, the example that you mentioned was in a book called Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton, and it was really a breakthrough medical school instructor who had an epiphany when he discovered that he could remove the nucleus from cells and they could continue living, fighting off disease and, respirating and everything until they grew old and died. Then they couldn't divide because they didn't have the chromosomal material. But he wanted to know, where's the program stored? If the nucleus is gone, where's the program stored for the cell? Now, my brother's a molecular biologist. I'm a chemist, nuclear chemist, and I build cars. So we have 3 different perspectives about it, but we all agree on one thing. All biology is molecular. So when we get to that point, it gets kind of confusing because, I have a 30-year-old son. He eats the same food that I eat, and yet he's 30 and I'm 60. So how is it that we consume the same food? We're in the same basic environment, but my cells are old and his cells are young. So this is a big dilemma, and it goes to the root of disease. Why is it that a normal human cell knows when to stop dividing? I have a cut, and that cut knows to heal just the right amount to fill in the gap, replace all the damaged cells, and put itself back to normal. But a cancer cell does not know when to stop dividing. Its protein is broken. Somehow that protein says just keep right on dividing. And the nucleus is abnormal, it's dense, and we don't know how to control it. We're trying to figure out all kinds of ways to kill it. Now we've gotten smart enough to know how to tell the body to recognize that broken protein and make the body's own immune system go after that cancer cell. It's breakthrough stuff, but they're approaching it on a molecular basis. How is it that the human consciousness can not just believe, but know that they're healed and somehow create an energy environment for that body that those cells or that immune system knows to go after that cancer cell and eliminate it from the body? And we know that it happens. Tumors disappear, livers heal themselves, leukemia goes away, eyesight comes back, and we just call it a miracle and go on because somebody in a white coat didn't fix it. The only thing I can tell you is that, and Bruce Lipton brought this up, but I asked him a further question about it, and he came to the same conclusion I did. The human consciousness is part of that environment for that those genes to choose those proteins. If that consciousness can be put in the right state, then the genes will select the right proteins to make those changes and keep that body healthy.
Wow, that's powerful.
Because we don't really have enough gene pairs to explain this. We're not as complex as an ape. We're not as complex as a jellyfish, our genetics. But somehow we make all these complex proteins to manipulate and control this very complex physiology. It's because genes have a wide variety of choices of proteins that they can make. How do they know? So we studied identical twins. At birth, identical. At age 40, radically different in genetic makeup. They're exactly the same at birth. What is the change? They're wearing the same clothes, they're eating the same food, they're living in the same house till they're probably 20. What makes them diverge? It's the being within that makes the genes choose different proteins.
Brooks, what do you think of the ancients and their consciousness? The idea of who they were to themselves, their philosophy. Personally, I don't think they could have achieved what they achieved without being highly evolved souls. And I mean, look at the pyramids, look at the intricately carved techniques. They had a philosophy to do that. We can't replicate that, and I think they were polymaths. They philosophical souls. They were obsessed with the Fibonacci sequence and obsessed with nature and harmony and balance. And do you see this as an age we need to go back to, or this is a lesson we can take from the past?
Well, the Fibonacci sequence is a product of the Fibonacci process, which is taking the two previous numbers, adding them together to get a third. But the most important thing to remember here is by the time you take any number, any two numbers, even numbers that are unrelated to each other, and add them together, and then continue the process from where you just started. By the time you get 8 iterations, you can take the 7th number and divide it into the 8th number, and you get the golden mean. Mm-hmm. This is the main thing to remember here. And all the energy that's in the universe, only about 4.5% of it actually becomes physical, actually becomes third dimensional, makes the transition from another dimension into this dimension. Why is that? because the matter that's in this dimension, and it's all made up of protons or electrons, that's it. In order to make a proton, you have to fall on that golden mean. It's regenerative. It's productive. It creates something in the third dimension. If you're off of that golden mean, you'll never become physical. It's still out there. It's still chaotic. It's still bouncing around and reflecting and irradiating the entire universe. But only about 4.5% of it makes it into this dimension. Our souls are something completely different than that. We are not corporal. And somehow, I still don't understand the process. Maybe someday I will. We join this physical body as a couple of cells to begin with until we become able to breathe air instead of amniotic fluid. Unfortunately, we get to come to this world, are nurtured by parents, and pretty soon can wipe our own behinds and feed ourselves. Then we become sovereign beings. I think what we forget along the way, on account of we don't know how to speak and express ourselves or remember, is that we are an eternal being having this mortal experience. So we live for 100 years, and that's a cosmic microsecond. But after you do it a few thousand times, you should be able to remember something. You should be able to bring a skill forward with you to this day. And I think in every age, like in the days of the pyramids, and by the way, that was done long before Egyptus ever walked into the Nile River Valley, a handful of those beings remember how to do stuff. And they try to teach the age of their day how to remember who they are. And I think we're in a remarkable time when there are these individuals, and usually there's only a handful, but there's probably more of them now on the earth than there ever have been before. We could speak to each other. We can get this urge to remember who we were and bring it forward so that we can improve our present life. And that is going to improve the entire body of mankind. And that relationship between us and Earth and the solar system and the galaxy is going to shift forever.
Thank you. I just want to jump in on that. Thank you for saying that. Brooks, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and when she was 3, she was telling me a story of how when I was 17, I pierced my own ear. Nobody was in the bathroom when I did this, by the way.
Did you use the clothespin or did you use the potato?
Oh, I think I used ice from a glass in a restaurant that I was in. Don't ask. I wasn't drinking or anything like that. I really wanted to have my ears pierced. Let's put it that way. And I didn't.
Interesting story.
So yes, there's a whole host of other things, but this is probably the most relevant one at this point. And I just looked at her and I thought to myself, I mean, she actually told me the story, like from beginning to end. And I looked at her, I said, how did you know that? She goes, well, I was there. I saw you. And, I just said to myself, I said, whoa, I think our job is to actually take all of these different experiences that we have. And, for me, I got, I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up in a pretty much a traditional, family, a great family, actually, traditional environment. And, a lot of this stuff was kind of squashed down. But I pursued it anyways. But my point is that, when I look at these beings coming in, these different kids and adults, there's adults that are spontaneously remembering, lives on different planets and, different experiences that they've had. And, they feel really compelled to contribute, whether it be to humanity or, just getting these downloads about different, things in regards to, science and technology. It's like, wow, if we can actually learn to accept and integrate these various aspects of who we are in, then maybe we stand a heck of a better chance as a society of really figuring this thing out and getting out of our own way.
Well, I thank you very much for sharing that story. I had a sound engineer that was helping me with a commercial some years ago. His name is Larry Plant. And he said his son, he was getting him out of the bathtub one day for something like that. And all of a sudden he stopped, got real stern, looked at his dad and said, do you remember when I was your daddy and I used to give you rides on the big red tractor? And that's exactly what his father used to do. So I am I hear stories like this all the time, and I'm not just a believer. I know. So I think maybe everyone has some experience like that. Some deny it. Some are rationalized out of it by the forces around us, and we refuse or are incapable of believing that the rest of our days. And unfortunately, most people die in a fog, in ignorance, missing the chance. But maybe, in the next life, I just have a feeling that this is the age, this is the time when the best, the brightest from all over, not just this world, but other worlds, have come here to be born, to do something absolutely amazing.
I'm in agreement. Go ahead, James.
You got such an open mind, Brooks. You really do have a wonderful spectrum. Not only have a very wide spectrum, but you have a wonderful open mind, and you don't drop your brain out either. You don't run away with yourself. And some people want to just believe anything, but you have this wonderful role between scientist and open to all sorts as well. I mean, how do you keep that in the scientific doctrine? It seems to be that most scientists don't have that, Brooke. It seems to be a rare quality among scientists.
Well, I don't really know the answer to that, except that I wasn't really raised traditionally, not in a traditional family. Family was broken apart and splattered across the planet. So I was kind of thrown into adulthood at age 10. So I don't have, those influences on me, but I have seen what indoctrination does to what I consider very bright minds. And it has taken a while to get them to open up, to see maybe the other side of the dogma into which they've fallen. And that's why I call it religiosity. They have postulates and axioms to which they hold, and they never question the derivative of where that came from. They just assume that's the truth. And one of my colleagues, obviously not, because he died a long time ago, Niels Bohr, said the opposite of truth might be another truth. He called it the principle of complementarity. There is many, many cases, especially in science, where it's not true or false. It's true and true. And you have to try to blend them together in a third dimension to come up with an answer that makes sense. Why, I ask my colleagues all the time, because we build electric vehicles. While you're working on these, I always want you to remember one thing, one question. What is electricity? Nobody really knows. Where'd all these electrons come from? I mean, yeah, they spin up the big magnets down there at Duke Energy, but where do they get the electrons? How are we able to store the electrons in these black boxes and then go driving around town on them? What is an electron? We don't really know. We don't know how they're made. We don't know how many of them there are, where we're going to use them all up. Protons we pretty well understand. We're starting to slam them apart at CERN on a regular basis, but doesn't mean we can make one.
Do you think then that's a great thing that, the discovery of quantum physics has brought us back to philosophy again? That's kind of brought it home again. It's a new age for us. We haven't really grasped it yet, but I still think we're in the transition period.
I don't think you can ever grasp quantum physics. What you can do is run thought experiments in quantum physics. And that's really healthy. We create the math so that we can sit back and look at the relationship between the forces in the universe. We don't really get exact values. They never exactly work out, but the relationship is pretty clear. And that's what's important for our minds to be able to capture. What is the relationship between space and time, between mass and energy? Once we have the math laid out, then you can see the relationship. Then you know how to think about things.
If I was a fly on the wall situation, I'd love to be at the Solvay conference where the think tank for all the quantum physicists, where they born all the ideas out of it. I'd love to be there just for that. What a great meeting of minds.
I'm afraid you see a lot of crying. They're very tender souls, theoretical physicists. I have read history books where they've had these epiphanies, these dreams, and they go before their colleagues for peer review and say, this is how I think, space and time work. And so severe was the criticism that they went home and committed suicide.
Well, that's why I think the need for independent research labs and independent research is so important. When I think about where funding can go, I think it should be going to these different groups of organizations and people that can, be able to pursue some of these things as opposed to constantly needing to prove it in the mainstream academic environment. So
I agree with you. And there's numbers that are beyond imagination being thrown around here. The NERC is going to receive in the next 18 months $200 billion to tie the grid together between Canada, the United States, and Mexico and make it function as one grid. We asked for 1%, $2 billion to study off-grid grids, what we call low voltage local control. So that in case the grid does go down, hospitals, universities, labs, NASA, the police departments can all stay operating. The grid's great, but there are other ideas, and we're only asking for 1%. They gave us nothing. I can't tell you. I can tell you between 2008 and 2012, we spent just under $200,000, just my company, in applying for grants. It's a very expensive, very time-consuming process. Zero.
Right.
Zero.
I know if we get another...
And
Sorry, Susan.
Go ahead, James.
No,
go ahead, James.
I was just going to say, if we get another Carrington event, we're going to be in trouble. This planet is going to be in serious trouble. And,
believe me, that's one of the failure modes of the NERC. They consider pandemic. They consider natural disaster, which would be a Carrington event, a tsunami, an earthquake, something like that, and physical or cyber attack. They now have to protect themselves against those three vulnerabilities that didn't exist before they tied the grid together.
Well, and again, that's pretty much what I was going to say is until they're forced, because I think for those of us who can, we can smell the smoke and know that the smoke is going to lead to the fire. And we're saying, hey, we don't have to do it this way. We can do it in a different way. But unfortunately, for those people who are, dare I say, lacking creativity, and maybe a connection with the natural Earth's dynamics and, maybe the cosmos as well. It's, operation as is to stay in the matrix that they're in right now. But there will be something that cracks it. There will be something that, that forces that opening to occur. And I think that there will be those of us who are ready to be able to step in and say, yes, okay, we're here to do this now.
You remind me of, I went to Washington last year and spoke to Congress, and the question came up, well, these kinds of things take a lot of money and takes a lot of time. We don't know what results will be. And I asked the question, how is it that every nation on the earth is broke? We're broke. China's broke. India's broke. Russia's broke. Europe's broke. How can everybody be broke? It doesn't make any sense.
The math don't add up, Brooks. The math don't add up.
Well, I consider it a giant game of poker, and the house is taking a piece of the pot after every hand. And before long, everybody looks up from their green visors and nobody can ante up. Somebody at that table, pardon my French, should have one big ass pile of chips, but there's no chips on the table. Where did they all go?
For sure. Brooks, I want to mention the Arc of Millions of Years. What a successful book series. Do we see another one of these books in the pipeline?
There is a book 4, and it just went through the publisher. We did a new edition of that, because the first 3 books raised a lot of questions and made a lot of predictions. And what really amazed us is that after the first book, which was, in my mind, I thought I'd buy 5 copies and my co-author would buy 5 copies and we call ourselves authors and that would be it. By March of 2005, it was history. I mean, we made a lot of money off that first book. And I said, wow, people are interested in this stuff. So we wrote 3 more books. By the time we got done with the 3rd book, we kind of reached a point of doom and gloom. It was like, oh my gosh, 2012 is going to happen. Everything's going to boom, end. Everything's going to collapse. It's going to be one world government, Illuminati, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So we decided to write a volume 4 to try to pull all that back together and say, look, at the end of the day, the reason we have all this from all these ancient civilizations, the reason they preserved it all, and we were able to put it all together in a scientific way, is to empower us to choose another future. And that's what book 4 is about. The fact that the future is in our hands. Yes, we have scriptures, but remember, those are, for the most part, prophecies. And prophecies are conditional predictions. I mean, this is what's going to happen if you keep doing this. Mm-hmm. This is what's going to happen unless you do this. Well, if you decide, okay, we know that future. I don't like that one. Let's choose another one. We are empowered to do that. And no God can stop us. No host of gods can stop us. That is why those things are written down.
Do you think there's an ignorance on the planet at the moment to that message? I think personally, I see that myself, Brooks. I see where you're from. I see a lot of monuments and a lot of different civilizations. It's my favorite subject, civilization. I see messages left to us, important messages for humanity. But do you see the ignorance on that planet? Do you see anybody like waking up to this message?
I do see people waking up, but I also see that it disrupts the balance of fear. We were talking about Iran today. Yeah. Iran's 82.5 million people live there. And you got maybe 4,000 clerics that are running the country and are saying death to America, death to whoever. The Iranian people want peace. They want democracy. They want education. They want freedom. So why is it that they don't fire the 4,000 clerics? Because they are locked into this dogma of their religion. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're very close to the tipping point when, especially if these sanction money is released, the general public, the average Iranian, is going to say, you're not getting your hands on that money. That's our money. And it could trigger something amazing in Iran. I don't know. On the other hand, like I said before, we are, for the most part, eternal beings having a mortal experience. Some of those eternal beings are evil, and they remember that they're evil, and they remember how to do wickedness and evil when they become adults, and they're good at it. They've been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. Can you get rid of them? No. We've wiped them out so many times. I can count in history probably 5 times just in the last 2,000 years, and they keep coming back with the same ideas and the same methods. So how do you change that? Mm-hmm. You change that by turning that environment into light, and the darkness has no place to dwell.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Susan. No.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. Do you think that, there's talk, more recently about changing timelines, that you can change timelines or be in a different timeline than someone else is in, whether, you change environments. And like, again, I moved a couple of years ago from Massachusetts to Hawaii, and it's a very different environment. The consciousness
Christmas is way
very
different.
Melikaliki Maka, absolutely it is. But it is different, and the consciousness is different because the environment, the earth it feels so much more natural and more pure here. So you're tied into the elementals, so much more cleanly. So do you feel that, because as we're talking about an entire society of people that are, pretty much in fear, or rather in submission, maybe a little bit more of an accurate term. What about those people that are waking up? Do you feel like there's kind of a couple of different timelines going on right now?
This is a really good question because it plays to the peaceful person, the person that's benevolent, that's looking for peace and harmony and growth and the American dream or whatever dream. We are a people that try to avoid conflict. We call ourselves a cheek-turning people. If somebody slaps us, we just turn our cheek and wait for the next one. We try to avoid conflict. And if you awaken, what exactly does that mean? Well, I awaken to the fact that this guy really has ill intentions against me. It's not just that, I'm his enemy. So what am I going to do about that? Am I going to put a uniform on and take a gun and go kill his family? What am I going to do about that? What do I do with that awakenness? And I see a lot of confusion out there when I go to conferences where I'm invited to speak, or I go to Egypt. I've been there many times. I go to China or Japan or Tibet. I see confusion. Oh, they're awake. They see the forces that are working out there, but they don't know what to do. They want to end the conflict, but they don't want conflict. So it's like the Iranian people. You got 82 million people. You got 4,000 clerics. You got 6 million Jews. You got 1,600 SS. How do you control the masses with that few soldiers? To answer the question, all you really have to do is fly somewhere. Walk up to the TSA and watch 6 or 7 people in uniform control hundreds of thousands of people flying in every airport in every state in the Union. We bow our heads, we put our shoes in the bucket, and we say nothing. So what do? How do we get our airports back? How do we get our liberty back? That's a really great question, and I think there really has not been a time in American history when the American voter is ready to answer that question.
Great point.
I know there's a massive difference in, especially this part of the world, UK and Ireland. I mean, I see Americans as extremely patriotic, but I also have this, over here too, the Irish are known to be patriotic, but they have a detest for the government simultaneously.
Namely English.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
Even within especially at the moment with current politics in Ireland, I mean, Irish people detest the government and they're still patriotic to their country. And I see a difference in America, and we don't understand that. We really just don't grasp with that. There can be patriotism and still liking your government. It's all the one to you guys. No disrespect, man, but personally, I think people need to remove themselves from a patriotism perspective and get back to.
I couldn't agree more. I think patriotism is a dangerous concept.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm Scottish. My roots go back to Stranraer, Scotland. My family's castle's been there since 1344, and our line goes back to 695. So we're banner-toting, tribal, sword-carrying, second to the last man standing kind of people. But it's time for the world to change.
I don't know. I just don't know how we get rid of the governments. I see the governments imposing this infrastructure on the people, down to the water system, to everything, and people are waking up and they feel restless. There's a futile, attempt by most people. They just don't know what to do, and it's almost going to get to a point where they're sickened with it. They're sickened of being awake and not being able to do anything. I think
Sure. Well, there's a fine line of distinction between governing and ruling. And no human likes to be ruled over. It's okay to have government. It's okay to have traffic lights, and it's okay to have municipal utilities. That's fine. That's what we hire them to do. They manage the things that are common to us all. Transportation, utilities, things that I don't have to now spend my day trying to figure out how I'm going to cook the next meal or kill the next, turkey for Christmas dinner. Somebody else does that because that's what government is there for, to facilitate that kind of intra and interstate commerce. But when government begins to rule, when they begin to say, you can't do this any longer because we have to compensate for people that don't believe in God. When they begin to rule, like our company wants to build an electric vehicle, and we have the EPA coming to us and say, well, you can't build an electric vehicle and sell it without a fuel economy label on your vehicle. I'm sorry, I'm a deer in the headlights here. Help me understand what a fuel economy label will do for a vehicle that has no fuel. Why do I have to answer questions and pass tests that have to do with a gasoline-powered vehicle when we don't use any fuel? In fact, as far as the EPA is concerned, we make electric shavers. We're not even in the car business as far as you're concerned. We don't have an exhaust pipe, so you have no jurisdiction. These are not the droids you're looking for. But they want to rule, and so we have to comply because they can fine us up to $32,000 per vehicle if we don't have that label in the window.
One of the things I just want to bring up, I'm sure you probably have heard of Michael Tellinger and, the Ubuntu movement. Speaking with Michael recently, again, living here in Hawaii, the Hawaiians don't recognize themselves as really being part of the United States. They are very much sovereign people. And you feel that, when you're here, in pretty much everything that you do, you can feel that energy. It feels freer rather. I can't say completely free because we do have military presence on the islands. But you get that sense and you feel that. And, you look at the fact that 90% of the food that's consumed in Hawaii, actually on the island of Kauai, is imported in. And we didn't need that before. All the food was grown. The heiaus were used as a beautiful place to grow the food and exchange. Obviously, a strong connection with spirit as well. So when I look at all of that, I think, what Michael says is you want to be able to not, I guess, take it back, but to start really at the local level, like the real immediate local level. And if you can get that and work with the politics at the local level, or have somebody run for office that's actually really going to, go back and work for the people, then you've got a chance there. What do you think about that?
Well, that's what I like about Michael. I've known him for 10 years. He's
great.
He is an awesome thinker. I think what he gets most fired up about is the fact that South Africa, for instance, incorporated. And he wanted to know, who incorporated it? Who gave you the authority to become a corporation? We're a country. So he wants to unincorporate South Africa. The United States is a corporation. It is becoming more and more fascist every single day. So what Michael would say is, look, if you want to take this back, you let the corporate food rot on the shelves in the market. And you only buy the stuff that's grown locally. If you could get everybody to do that, I guarantee you no grocery store would carry Kellogg's cornflakes. You'd only buy what came from the islands themselves. If you could get the people to do that. That takes one mind. That takes one mind to do that. To say, we're not going to take this anymore.
They say that's the best weapon sometimes, is your refusal to accept the system, your refusal to comply, like a non-compliance.
Sure. I know what their buyer is going to do. Okay, how many boxes of Kellogg's cornflakes do we need to buy this week? None. What do you mean none? Well, all the boxes are still on the shelf. Nobody bought it. That's how those decisions are made.
Brooks, we're well over the hour. I just wanted to take a mention. Tell us the name of your radio show. People can actually tune in and listen to you too.
Sure. On Sunday nights, 8 o'clock to 11 Eastern, it's X Squared Radio. That's a mathematical function, X squared. Any number put into it comes out positive. So we take the forces of today and compare them against history. And we approach it from a scientific point of view and try to come up with a solution every single week for where to stand, what to do, what to choose, how to protect yourself, how to open your own mind.
And where can people get copies of your books? What's the best website for you?
The best is just to go to Amazon and buy them. But if you want an autographed copy of any of the books, you can find the website for each one at xsquaredradio.com. I'll send you an autographed copy, and I'll give you the audiobook for free if you buy the paperback.
Wow. Awesome. That's a deal.
So if you're not a good reader, don't worry about it. I read it for you.
Fantastic.
Susan, have you got any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Just one last. Very small question. It's for you. Everything we do will eventually affect the universe. Do it on purpose. Yeah. Would love your final thoughts on that.
Well, I was a published author at 13, and I sold an article to Car and Driver magazine called "Black Cars Are Faster," and my English teacher said, "You know, why are you doing this? Why do you want to be a writer? Why do you want to be an author?" I said, "Well, the word is the key to the natural high. It emits pictures from those who cannot paint, music from those who cannot play. With it, the power of the mind is infinite. So, everything we do will eventually affect the universe, and we should do it on purpose." So I took that last part, and that's my statement on my website, my email signature.
I'm going to wrap things up with that. Wrap things up with that, guys. Today's author is Dr. Brooks Agnew, I should say. His books are The Arc of Millions of Years, Volume 1, 2, and 3. Hopefully we're going to see Volume 4 very soon. And I got to mention, my favourite one is Remembering the Future, the Physics of the Soul and Time Travel. I really love that one. I think that's got to be my favourite. Although I love the historical mysteries books. I really do. That's what I do on the show. But I really enjoyed that one. I really did. When will we see number 4 on the shelf?
Number 4 should be at Amazon this month. So August, it should be ready to go. I recommend it just to fill in the set. You'll have 1,500 pages of, just about everything meaningful that's been done on, what would the advent of 2012, what it means to humankind. It's kind of let's call it a semicolon in humanity, when we ended one age and began another age. And hopefully we can do things in this age a little bit differently. Sure. A lot differently.
Well, I look forward to seeing it on the shelf, and we'll do another show on that when it's out, Brooks. But for now, I really thank you for your time today. Great to see you again, Susan.
Thank you.
Aloha. Thank you both. Bye.